Hi, my name is Ray Posey, and I'm a professor in the School of Education at Point Loma Nazarene University. And we wanted to take just a couple of minutes of your time to talk with you about generational differences. Um, Generational differences grow out of the age of a group and also the culture. And we wanted to show you, hopefully, how different generations communicate differently. And then how would that impact your communication with these um, clinical practice students, student teachers that you'll be having in your classroom. So let's first talk about the generational groups. First, there were traditionalists, born 1920 through 1942. That's my mother's age group. And I remember her always writing letters to people, friends and family, to communicate, sticking a postage stamp on it, going to the post office and mailing it. Whereas as it moved to me as a baby boomer, born 1942 to 1960, our group didn't do as much of that formal written kind of communication. More of telephone calls, for example, instead, with a dial telephone. And so then there was the onset in that group of ATM cards, and people started moving away from the traditional kinds of banking and those sorts of things. And when you think about Gen Xers born 1960 to 1980, they probably don't even have a check in their house. Everything's done electronically, their banking and all that sort of thing. And their communication would be through the onset of text messaging, sort of thing. And then there's Millennials, which is the age group that you'll be working with as a student teacher. And they were born in 1980 through 2005. And there's some things that they haven't experienced that that other generations have. For example, if they were born after 1984, they don't even know what the space shuttle was when it blew up. They probably think that Humvees, minus the artillery, have always been available to the public for purchase. They never rolled down a car window. They never used a dial telephone. They might confuse the Keating Five with a rock band. They have grown up with bottled water. They think that General Motors has always been working on an electric car. And they probably think that Nelson Mandela has always been free and a force in South Africa. So they just different generations have a different perspective on things because of, again, their age group and the culture. So how might generational differences impact communication between a student teacher, a mentor, and other colleagues in the school setting? So let's talk a little bit more closely, since you'll be working with millennials, about who they are. They use technology whenever possible. They use email and text to communicate. They want to make the work environment fun. They like humor. They understand that they can multitask. And they view silence as disapproval. On the last point, silence as disapproval, when working with young people now, the millennials, in my classes, I've tried to use the same motto as I did when I was a classroom teacher. Make visible your invisible expectations. So because they view if I'm silent, that I'm disapproving of them, and I have found it's just better up front to clearly lay out my expectations for their performance. And you may want to do that with your student teacher as well, to just sit down right away and sort of lay out what your expectations are so that they know up front. The other thing I wanted to point out is oftentimes this group is called the technology generation. And on this list, it says they use technology whenever possible. But what I've found, since I teach quite a bit of the technology here, that they know how to use it for social media purposes or for communication, but they do not know how to use it to help enhance a lesson, to enhance their teaching. So you want to be aware of that. If you ask them to do something, why don't you do something with technology for me in a lesson? They may struggle with that. They'll figure it out, but it's not going to be as um, easy as you might think they would. Here are some of the things that they have had available to them. Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube, and if you notice, Facebook, if you notice on here, most of these things are about communication or purchasing with Amazon kind of thing. It's not, the only one on here that's about enhancing teaching is really Prezi. So they haven't had as much experience with that as, like I said, like they have with the communication part. And it is an interesting fact that many of them have met their significant others online, which is very different than past generations. So let's look at this chart about their differences in expectations and communication. If we say education it was a dream for traditionalists. It was a birthright to baby boomers. It was a way to get there, a better job kind of thing for Gen X's. And millennials would say it's an incredible expense. Their work ethic. Traditionalists were dedicated. You pay your dues. Baby boomers were driven, workaholics even. Gen Xers wanted a balanced life, work smarter with greater output. And millennials are, even though they're ambitious and entrepreneurial, they want to be done at the end of the day at 5 o'clock and go off to their own life. As for preferred work environment, traditionalists, it was conservative, it was hierarchical, there was top-down management, you were told what to do. In my generation, baby boomers, I can remember the onset of school site councils, and because we wanted a flat hierarchy, it was going to be democratic, warm and friendly, where we all worked together for the betterment of the school. Gen Xers would want a functional, positive, efficient, fast-paced, and flexible environment. And millennials prefer a collaborative environment, creative, diverse, continuous feedback. The interactive style of traditionalists was one-on-one. You sit down and you talk face-to-face with someone. Baby boomers are team players. There's lots of meetings. How well I know. Gen Xers are entrepreneurs, so they want to cut to the chase. They don't want any of the information that's not pertinent to their exact position or job. And millennials want a collaborative environment with lots of feedback. So this last point sort of caught me off guard a bit because teaching students, I've been at the university for 15 years, and over those 15 years I have seen a great change in the students. And they, at this point, they want a collaborative environment. They want a collaborative communication style. They don't view authority as that far above them, but that they have something to add to and they want their voice to be heard. So how might that impact your communication with them? You probably want to stop and think about that. I have found that it's a good thing that we can collaborate, that they do have a lot to offer. And even though some of their ideas might be a little bit out there, but they do bring up some creative, wonderful ideas. And if I didn't allow them to collaborate with me, if I went back to that more hierarchical structure, I would never hear those ideas. But it also took me aback a bit because I was surprised at how they want to be heard. So the goal of this little talk has been to help you better understand the generations and how you might communicate with these student teachers. You know, I teach learning theory, and there's a theory I teach by Erik Erikson called psychosocial development. And one of the stages of his theory is from the age 40 to 65. And people in that group, there's a strong desire to give back to the next generation. And it's interesting that, mentor teachers with student teachers, that's exactly what you've chosen to do. You're taking your expertise and your knowledge and you're giving it back to the next generation of teachers so that they might learn from your experiences and actually become probably better teachers than they would have been without that input. The only thing with millennials you'll want to be aware of as you give back to their generation, you need to give it in a way that they can hear it. And so, like what we talked about, the collaboration with them, the continuous feedback, laying out your expectations, and also being open to a communication style that might include texting or something like that. So give it some thought, and hopefully this will help you feel more effective with your student teacher and make the whole experience more enjoyable for both of you. Thank you.